Hi, Haunted Family, and welcome back to another episode. If you like what you've been hearing, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give me a good old thumbs up. So some of y'all may not know this, but I actually live on a farm. I have, chickens and ducks and goats and just all kinds of farm critters. And I also know that sometimes farms can be a little creepy. I'm not, a 100% huge fan of having to go out and check on animals at, 3 o'clock in the morning, which sometimes has to happen. I'm also not a huge fan of our barn, which sits up on the hill close to the tree line. I find it a little creepy, which is another reason why we don't actually keep animals in our barn. And our stories today deal just with that. Creepy or haunted farms. So sit back and enjoy the show. Story 1. History never dies. One evening, years ago, a friend and I were driving around and passed by a historic farm site that he volunteered at for years. We were, and still are, huge history nerds, and I had never been to the farm before, so we decided to take a quick look. It was after hours and just around dusk, so no one was there. I kind of felt like we were doing something we shouldn't be doing. But he had the keys and was familiar with the place. We were talking and walking up to the front door of this 1830s stone farmhouse to let ourselves in, when we hear the door shut and locked from the inside. The lights were out, and nobody but us was around. He hesitates for a second, and then unlocks the door, and goes in, all loud and blustery, I guess, in case someone was there. No reply or reaction, so we nervously look around. He's telling me about the history of the place. We're both loud to calm our nerves, but in mid-sentence, we both hear something fall over down in the basement. It sounded like a wood broom. We are dead silent. We realize that the basement door is ajar. In that moment, we hear slow footfalls walking up the basement stairs as a light turns on. We didn't say another word. We rushed to the front door and got out of there. When I say rush, I mean we were in a quiet, dead panic, almost fighting each other to be the first out the door. As we're getting into his car, we see the basement lights go out, and a minute later he realizes he has to go lock the door before we can leave. After pumping himself up to go back to the house, he runs up and finds that the door is already locked. After we left, my friend insisted that we go get drinks. He was so upset that he drank more than I've ever seen a person drink. I had to drive his car back to his place and tell his wife what had happened. I crashed on the couch, but didn't get any sleep. The next day, my friend seemed angry and confused, and insisted that we go back. Our mutual friend, Rick, was working the farm that day. We get there, and Rick says that the door was locked when he got there at 7 a.m., and that he doesn't stay inside the house after hours because it just feels different. We told him what happened, and he got visibly upset and didn't want to talk about it. Maybe 6 months later, we learned that Rick had quit his job of 5 years because the owners had asked him to stay late and rearrange furniture in the house, and he had heard someone or something in the basement. According to Rick, the lights came on. Someone walked halfway up the stairs, but he opened the door and no one was there. He left immediately, and as he was fishing the keys out to lock the door behind him, it locked itself from the inside. None of us ever went back for any reason, and we never talk about that place again. Story 2. A farmhouse full of ghosts. We live in a 120-plus-year-old farmhouse, or did nearly 2 decades ago. At night, Mom would frequently hear children giggling, and of course she would think it was my sisters and I. She would attempt to catch us staying up late, but it was never us. We were always asleep in our separate bedrooms. According to her, there was no way we could have been giggling like that in our sleep, as it was multiple children all at once, coming from the same location. During a brief period of time, when our dad had to work in another town during the week, and thusly leaving Mom alone with my siblings and I, she had several encounters with what she believed to be the spirit of some old guy who had once lived in our home a super long time ago. The most memorable encounter was her waking up dairy farm early to a man standing in her bedroom wearing a wide-brimmed hat He shouted, "Good morning!" to her, and then swiftly disappeared. She claims to have heard him walking around the house, and maybe seeing him in the kitchen in the early mornings on a couple occasions. I forget the farmer's name, but after that, whenever the house made weird noises, or doors or windows would slam shut, she would jokingly blame it on him. Once, when I was really little, I was over at a sleepover on a friend's farm. The sun had just set, and we were still playing outside. We decided it would be fun to play hide and seek in the dark, since it would make it harder, right? After a few rounds, it was my turn to go seeking. I, in all my childhood wisdom, decided to look in the cornfield. The cornfield wasn't that big, but it was still dense and confusing. I had my little flashlight and was just following the rows. After a little bit, I ended up tripping and falling face first in the dirt. My flashlight had spun out of my hands and was facing the stalks. I went to grab it, and when, in its beam of light, I saw something just past the corn, between two stalks, a pair of eyes, flaxen hair over it. The eyes were red, as if they had been crying, but stared right at me, wide-eyed. I screamed so loud, hurried out of the cornfield. My friend's parents obviously ran out to me. When I told them about the face, they seemed disturbed, but when they searched the fields, they didn't find anything. I still remember that face, I swear. I don't know what or who it was, but I remember that face peering out from the field between the stalks. When I was a little older, barely a teen, growing up as a teen in farmland means you use your weekends and spend them in the woods, around a campfire drinking bad beer, and occasionally smoking terrible pot. There was this one particular part of the woods that we'd like to build our fires, since it was nice and isolated. One weekend we were there, drinking in that spot, trying not to let the fall chill get to us. Eventually, a couple of us had to go pee. So, like the classic kids we were, we go out to find a nice bush or something to water. I already had a beer in me, and despite it mostly being water, I was still fumbling around and giggling to myself. Hey, I was a skinny 16-year-old. It didn't take much to get me drunk. So we were joking around in our drunkenness and making it so we were mostly wandering around, then looking for a good spot to pee. But my friend suddenly yells out for us to look. He was pointing at what seemed like huge rocks, a little up ahead. Nothing too weird, but we go forward anyways. It was two giant rocks, with a tree growing intertwined between them. But beside one of them was a wooden cross. It had been painted white a long time ago, and a lot of the paint had been chipped away in time. But it only took a few minutes for me to see the words painted on the rock beside of it. The wicked lay here, painted in blood red. It scared us so badly that we made a run for it and never returned to our favorite drinking spot. Story 3. Pennsylvania Farmland. I grew up in the Union Depot area of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My grandparents, Mom and I, moved into this farmhouse when I was about 4 years old. It had sat vacant for a while. As early as I can remember, my great-uncle would come over and sit with my pap and tell him about the old man and the old lady he used to see in the rocking chairs on the porch, facing the road. I'm still not sure if the old couple was living the times he had seen them. Years passed, but as I got older, I got a bit better at expressing myself. I would run to my Nan and tell her I felt like someone was watching me, particularly on the stairs. She smiled and told me the Catholics would say it was my guardian angel. I just looked at her funny, not thinking or knowing what to tell her. Whoever was watching me was making me feel pretty uncomfortable, and at times downright scared. I was always terrified of my bedroom as well. I never slept there. The night was particularly terrifying, especially when you're a little kid. I slept in a pull-out bed in the living room until I was 11 years old, and then we moved out. My bedroom was always ice cold, and there was always dead flies on the windowsill, no matter how much we cleaned them. I remember one particular day watching a movie. It was nothing scary or anything. I believe it was Troop Beverly Hills. I was eating popcorn. When I looked up ahead of me at the wall, I could see in the mirror that a black, shadowy figure was passing right behind the recliner where I was seated. I dropped the popcorn and ran about a mile up the road to meet my Nan, who was on her daily walk. I used to constantly ask my grandparents if they had ever seen ghosts there. They would always say no. We moved to Duncannon, Pennsylvania when I was around 11 or 12. That's when I found out what was really up. My grandma said to me one day, "Jenny, I hate to tell you this, but I think that farmhouse we lived in really was haunted." Turns out that she saw an old man herself, very pale, in a white tee and overalls. She had been hanging curtains when she seen him resting against a car, parked in our driveway. She thought nothing of it until she went to see what he wanted, and then he was gone. She told me that every night before she fell asleep she'd hear whispers. It became so routine to her that she said that it was odd not to hear them in their new home. It sounded to her as if the radio dial was tuned, a lot of static, and both constant male and female voices. My grandfather, however, hadn't experienced anything, although he did believe her. The house has literally haunted my dreams for as long as I can remember. I'm not sure, but almost every dream was consistent. In the dream, the home was haunted by a plump, short, old lady who kind of kept to herself, a tall, thin, grouchy, sometimes angry old man, and a little boy. The little boy I remember very clearly, though. He only appeared in my dream very vividly one time. He had brown hair and blue eyes, with freckles across his cheeks. He was wearing a newsboy cap and a white shirt and suspenders. In that dream, he was peering out of my bedroom window at me while I was driven into the yard by the old man. I got the feeling that he was lost or in despair. Over the years, my interest grew in my dreams and the paranormal. I have since made several trips back to the old farmhouse. The house sat abandoned for 10+ years after we moved. One day, my mother and I went back and found some of my old gym coloring books in the middle of the floor of my old bedroom. I thought nothing of it until one day when I went back, a few months later, to show some friends where I grew up. I joked, I wonder if they left me anything else. We all ran out of there. We reached my bedroom, and in the same spot as the coloring book pages were on my previous visit was now the cover of that gym coloring book, which I have in my possession to this day. It came to my attention that it was quite a party house for a short period of time. The vacant house was also vandalized, and home for a runaway for a little bit. Apparently others has also gotten the vibe that they were not totally alone in the house. Some acquaintances were stunned that I grew up there, since it's so notoriously haunted, though no one seems to know any history of the place. At any rate, some of my friends and I began cruising by on occasion to check out the place. One night when we were riding by, we saw a steady orange glow emanating from 2 bedroom windows on the second floor. This was the room next to my old bedroom. This glow was very vibrant and orange-red. It was much too big and too controlled to be a fire. It didn't even flicker. On another occasion, we went back. We got out of the car in daytime. We went to walk around outside. We all felt as if something menacing was watching us, and we quickly left. We knew we didn't belong there. In the house I'm living in now, I woke up to the sound one night of a very heated, whispered conversation. I was very curious until I recognized the sound of static. At that point, I'd realized I was hearing the same thing my Nan used to hear at the farmhouse. That is the only current paranormal experience I've had. It scared me so much that I moved my bed, just to comfort myself. A few years ago, the old farmhouse was torn down to make way for a new development. To this day, when I drive by the now vacant lot, I get this awful feeling. I pity whoever buys the new house built on that land. It's almost as if the house itself is a ghost. I wish I knew the history of the place, but that's still a work in progress.